And Alex has written a humdinger of an article. Oh, it's a humdinger. Alex, you are by training a physicist. You're also the founder of the Thinking Coalition. For those who aren't familiar, give us a brief overview of the Thinking Coalition.
I think it started during COVID when I looked at the Diamond Princess numbers, and that showed that all of the Ferguson modeling was wrong. And I very naively and stupidly thought if I could demonstrate, and I wrote to the committee that was handling COVID, and I wrote to some MPs. I said, look, the Ferguson numbers are absolutely wrong, and here's the proof. And Professor Levitt came out with the same calculations. I thought that would be it. But then here we are 4 years later, and you realize there's a much bigger agenda at play. And I opened it up to volunteers. There's been about a group of about 8 of us, pretty well full time now. And I think we've covered almost all elements of the agenda. We look at religious issues, we look at censorship issues, we look at bots, we look at net zero, we've looked at quite closely. So we've covered the whole agenda now. And I'm trying to explain to people what's going on, but not in a I think this, because I'm actually showing the evidence, and I want other people to look at the evidence and then decide for themselves. Because I think a lot of people on our side just throw out opinion with no backing, which is pointless, really. It just muddies the waters, really.
Well, it's not just pointless, is it? It actually creates problems for us. This show is really about tackling the dis and misinformation that is put online, whether that's by our so-called our own side or the other side. But here's the thing is that, as one of our commenters pointed out, we certainly needed someone to think during COVID. We certainly did. And the thing is, Alex, it is difficult when you are a front runner of anything, because it sometimes takes people a little while to catch up. So you can appear to be the enemy, the problem maker, can't you, initially, until people go, oh, wait a second, I think he might have been right. And so that's why I thought, let me get hit in early on this, and let's have a look at it. It's about the Department of Government Efficiency. And it's not actually a government department at all, is it? It's the new thing that Elon Musk has been tasked with by Donald Trump. Talk to us a little bit about it, because I have some big questions for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think before going into that department, I think it's just important to emphasize what the selection is really all about. In my book, yeah, it's really a selection. The really important stuff happens between the funders and the candidates. So you've got to remember that $2.6 billion went into the presidential campaign. And, that money was coming in from the uber wealthy. They're putting in 120 million. Those are the key conversations. By the time it gets to us, the voters, we're kind of like nodding through the real deal that's been decided behind the curtain. So that's important, because the real agenda is driven by the moneyed interest. It's not driven, the MAGA crowd are very clear. We don't want wars. We want the border fixed. We want a better quality of life. We want to believe in America. Now, the uber wealthy, they want to get wealthy and they want more power. I think those are the key issues that they have. So, right off the bat, the idea that you're going to cut government spending, certainly in some areas, they're making a lot of money from that government spending through SpaceX and through Palantir, which is that's a whole can of worms, Palantir. So the idea that they're going to cut down spending when these guys are making so much money. So Palantir, for some crazy reason, is worth $150 billion right now, and half of that is from government revenue. Do you think like these guys are gonna sort of bite their own nose off when you know that the Palantir shareholders are involved in funding politics? It's all linked essentially. So, off the bat, I'm kind of suspicious. The other thing is, of course, that, yeah, go on.
Just to say, I think you have every right to be, because as you state very clearly in this article, like every election, this one takes place in two places at once, one in front of the curtain and the other behind the curtain, which is what you just outlined. And that is very important for people to understand, that what we see is not necessarily what we're getting. Right. And so I think that's really important from the get-go. But the other thing that I would like you to do before you proceed, and that is just talk a little bit about Palantir, because some people will be listening and they'll have no clue what Palantir is.
Yeah, well, I think nobody really knows right to the bottom what it really is. But what we know about it, it is quite vague what it does, but it really works for essentially security services and the military. So for the security services, it's a spying operation. So they process mass downloads of images and data and try and work out patterns using AI. And using those patterns, they identify wrongdoers. And they've done that a little bit. Now, the other bit for the military is to do with controlling drones. It's the same. It's the same process, really. It's like ingesting lots of data on images and feeds of videos on a battlefield, and then using that to control drones more efficiently than a human could on his own. That's the other side of the business. And the reason I raised it is because the share price of that thing is exploding right now, and it's almost exactly the day of the election that thing starts going up. And that tells me one thing: you can never know 100% sure, but 99.9% sure. That is telling me the Trump administration is going to be buying a lot of spyware and a lot of AI enhancement of military capability in the next, whatever number of years, let's say 5 years. And that for us is a massive red light. If that's the way it is, then you're talking about a much more technocratic, less free administration. And I think that is the really important bit of data. And it's more important than what Bobby says over a nice press conference or any of these other guys. It's like that's a hard bit of information that outweighs, to be honest, what politicians say, which for my money counts for nothing.
Who's the key character involved in Palantir linked to Trump?
The key character is the biggest shareholder, what's his name, Peter Thiel, and he's a business partner with Musk, and Musk put in 120 million into the Trump campaign. Thiel put money into many more candidates than JD Vance. He funded JD Vance's campaign in Ohio, and that helped get JD Vance into his position as vice president. And JD Vance is a former business partner with Peter Thiel. So they're all very closely linked. And well, I worked out, it was a couple of weeks ago, but Peter Thiel had already made $2 billion since the election day personally from this rally. And but it's more now because that share price keeps going up. So yeah, that's a strong incentive not to cut spending on services that they buy from Palantir.
Do we know if Palantir, as one of our commenters is saying, has control over NHS data?
Yeah, that's another huge story because the way that happened was they started their discussions with the NHS. I think it was about July 2019, plus minus. And then what did they do? As soon as this COVID event hit, they said, well, because it's emergency, you'll have to give us this stuff as an emergency contract, no tender, no nothing. So they did indeed take I don't know, but I don't think I've got the exact number. Nobody's quite sure, but they took over a huge degree of functionality from the NHS. No tender, no nothing. And then they did win a tender that took place not that long ago. But of course, by that stage, they're already in the door, and they're now starting to do more and more for the NHS. And that this is a huge Davos agenda item to take out bits of the government and privatize them to themselves. And it's very worrying in things like health and also military. I mean, to me, it's unthinkable you would subcontract a chunk of your spy work to basically a couple of dudes in Silicon Valley with multiple passports. It's absolutely nuts, and it's really worrying.
Dear God, it is very worrying indeed. And of course, just before we go into Trump's appointments, which of course was what all of this is about, I think it's also important to reflect on what actually happened at the election regarding the tech billionaires and their ultimate rejection right now of wokeism.
I'm not sure that whole thing isn't just a diversion, because
Interesting.
between the big thing about the billionaires, and the reason I brought them up, is there's almost no difference between the Democrat billionaires and the Republican billionaires.
Really?
They're all for a start billionaires, obviously, which implies a certain kind of mindset. And they're all more or less in finance and big tech, more or less are the two the two sectors, and they're all from one particular ethnicity as well. So there's a lot of overlap between them, and I'm honestly not seeing big differences in their um, policy policy priorities as far as I can see. I think their main policy priorities will be like keep that spending going to keep those assets valued, and also they've always had throughout history is a desire to have cheap money when they need it. That's the bottom. That's the floor for their assets. So
Interesting.
those are the two things. And then I kind of hinted at they're also all Israel first people. So those
Yes.
will be I think those are the things they care about. I don't think they care about the LGBT, the woke stuff. I think that is the divide and conquer issue for us. I think they'll turn it on and they'll turn it off. I don't think I think maybe for some of them it kind of matters, but listening to their interviews, I really don't think that's a big driver for them. I think they've seen that as a divisive issue for the population and therefore they use it. But for
That's
themselves
what it is. You're
personally,
absolutely right. You're absolutely right. What they've done is they've acted as a lightning rod to what's going on out there in the wider world, right?
yeah, I don't think they personally care about it. That could be unfair to maybe what let's say the real funding group, the hardcore funders are 25 people. There could be one or two that care about LGBT woke. The
Right.
rest, I don't think they do. And as I said, I think it's more a thing to frustrate, upset, divide the population. I think that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
It's
I
really
think
to
this is a
they've taken the brakes off it. They've taken the brakes off that cultural Marxism. That's all they've done. You know, that thing should have the brakes on it, but they just flicked the switch and took the brakes off,
yeah.
and it went wild. But I don't think the funders really care so much about it.
Right. It's all about money. Got you. Got you.
It's
Got
all
you.
about money.
It's all
Yeah,
about money. Well, let's start talking about some of Trump's appointments, which is really kind of the what your article on Substack is about. So, I mean, one of the things that you say, and I think this is really key actually, is about the conflation of America's interest with another country's interest, which is what you've just kind of touched upon right there,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
And that's key, isn't it?
yeah. But it's ludicrous to deny it and to be called you know something we know
Yeah.
what we're called because in 2006 there was a definitive academic analysis by Mearsheimer again. This guy Mearsheimer pops up everywhere. He is the one guy in Washington in academic circles that tells the truth about everything, and he's a very senior professor. And him with another guy from Harvard called Walt, they did an absolutely forensic document in all of the areas of influence, how it works, who's doing it. And they're saying this is a problem. America should set, America first means America first, not somewhere else first and then America second. And it's a documented problem. And now we've seen it now. It's so obvious now, isn't it?
So
We've seen
obvious.
these guys, there's no point in beating about the bush. They're radical pro-Zionists. They say that openly.
They
And
do.
I think that'll reflect again more the interests of the funding base than the average MAGA guy. The average MAGA guy, he wants peace. I mean, it's always been like that for people. People never want war, but the funders might have different ideas.
Indeed, indeed. Right. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about Doge. I presume that's the way it's pronounced. So, as we
Yeah,
said, it's not a government department. And of course, Elon Musk was a major part of electioneering and Trump's election, really. And, obviously, Elon Musk was able to galvanize people massively on X, which he obviously acquired. Some people suggest that he acquired it purely for these reasons, but that's not necessarily my understanding of it. But he definitely wants to be at the center of everything, doesn't he? And he definitely wants to be able to control what we're thinking and what we're saying. He's not a free speech advocate, actually. Do you
no,
find him to be a
no.
free speech advocate?
Not at all. And I think you're right. If you think that they paid 44 billion for this thing, I was joking with someone yesterday, like, what kind of adverts do you see? It's some kind of unknown Estonian tires, or, you're not seeing mass advertising on this platform. That I don't see any economic rationale. I mean, there is a little bit of economic rationale, but not for 44 billion. I think
Right.
the main purpose of this tool is to influence people. It's a big influence operation. And as I've been saying for years, the traffic on it is mainly fake. And right now it's gone through the roof,
Well, let's
pushing
get into
this.
that. Let's get into
Yeah.
that, because that is really interesting, really interesting. So first of all, I'm going to introduce this. This is from your article. Whenever the people need a hero, we shall supply him. That, of course, is a very famous Albert Pike. And look at this wonderfully flattering image of Elon Musk, because they are being pumped out in particular by certain Twitter accounts, aren't they? So let's get to Doge. The narrative is that Trump decided to create this department, right? Appoint Elon Musk to run it on the 12th of November. And as you point out, firstly, this department won't actually be a department. It won't even be in the government, right? So what is it?
Yeah. It's at best, it's an advisory body. That's all it can be. It's nothing really. There's no incorporation of any entity, nothing. It's just a name. It's got nothing behind it.
But this has galvanized people, and this makes people
It's
believe,
amazing, isn't it?
well, this makes people believe, as your article so brilliantly points out, that people are being listened to, that they are going to cut bureaucracy in the government, right? And that isn't necessarily the case. So let's talk about all the red flags around it, the artificial traffic that you're talking about. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's so big that it's basically a brainwashing operation at this stage. It's so enormous. So there's a number of accounts that are pushing out the meme on the left there. They're into. I'll talk about one of them. Dodge Designer was the one I looked at. So DOGE, the same DOGE, was actually created 3.5 years ago in 2021. So years before this Doge suddenly became a thing, which was a spontaneous decision. But this account's been created DOGE Designer, one word, years ago. So I'm already smelling a bit of a rat with that. It's got 1 million followers, and all it does really is tweet out those things, pictures of Musk like that, and in shades, holding a chainsaw, holding a flamethrower, and pretty boring announcements of X market share in individual countries. So I put in an example in there that they announced X is the #1 app in Italy, and that got 8.4 thousand likes. And anybody that knows anything about Twitter knows that's an insane number. And I mean, if it got 80 likes, I'd be surprised. Okay, maybe 100, but it's 8.4 thousand. And then Musk automatically replies to that tweet saying, "Hey, that's great." And you've got that sort of double pattern about 350 times. It's like so inauthentic. And then you start looking at the 1 million followers. It's kind of a lot of it's garbage. He's actually reduced visibility. What I used to do, I can't do anymore because you don't have the visibility into the followers or the likes anymore. So you can just guess now. But I've been around enough to know, and I can sample a few of the followers. It's garbage.
And the thing is, I've actually had to mute Elon Musk on X because he's all over it constantly. Every time I log in, he's at the top of my timeline, like repeatedly.
Yeah.
So the biggest customer on X is the owner of X, right? That's kind of like the bottom line, isn't it? He's absolutely everywhere. And you're absolutely right. He's constantly amplifying these messages from this Doge designer. And they are all very flattering of him, including this flattering picture. As one of our commenters says, I actually almost fancy Elon Musk from that image. Well, that's the whole point. It's all made to look very nice and very pretty, isn't it, right now? But there are other problems with the accounts that are going on X, aren't there, Alex? Because it's like, we are taught there's a flood of fake followers going on there, right? That are amplifying these messages.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the problem is, and this is very clever, people say there's no censorship, which is not true, because the censorship for us is that we're flooded, we're buried under all this garbage. Nobody's ever going to see anything we write with, the volume is staggering of these Musk memes at the moment. So I've tried to get off Twitter for long periods of time, but I've been doing a couple of tweets now. I'm getting 2 or 3 likes, which is less than under the sort of bad regime from the other guys, much less. So I'm getting far less visibility now than I ever had, well, than I've had for a long time. And he hasn't banned me, but he's just dumped so much garbage on top of all of us that there's no chance we'll ever get any traction on this thing.
Exactly. Well, as Robert points out in the comments, they did actually tell us, didn't they? Freedom of speech, not freedom of reach, when he
Yeah,
brought in his
yeah.
WEF woman to lead X, which probably should have told us everything we knew at that moment in time. But the thing is that this fake traffic is not just irritating; it is literally problematic. Because as you say, it's actually well, not potentially, it is burying true stuff, right? So we are we are all part now of a propaganda platform. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I'd go further and say it's brainwashing. High frequency images transmitted at somebody who doesn't necessarily want to see them is brainwashing.
Really?
And the more you see them, the more you're brainwashed. So it's not this is not it's not even that sophisticated. This is like 101 brainwashing, and that's what they're doing.
Right. I see. So here's the thing. Talk to me about the long game. What, because there's always a long game, isn't there? I mean, you're
Yeah,
saying
yeah,
that this was registered 3.5 years ago, right? Three and a
yeah.
half years ago before this non-government, non-department was set up. And obviously,
Suddenly, yeah,
yeah, because Musk is being portrayed as a warrior, right? Fighting your corner. That's the thing,
yeah,
okay?
yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
and that's
And
misleading.
that's the important thing. Why I don't trust him, and why it's easy for me not to trust him, is because I think I've got a version of what the long game is,
Go on.
and the long game is something we all probably at some point looked at years ago. Is that famous or infamous Microsoft patent, which ends 060606, and that is for a system, and it's you can literally pull the patent up. I don't want people to think this is conspiracy theory. You can actually, there's a
I've
link in
seen
the
it.
Substack article. Yep, just go click, look, don't take my word for it. It's a system where a user sits connected to a server, and the user has wearables or implants that measures that user's brain waves, heart rate, body temperature, blood pressure, etc. And when he is assigned a task, the system can understand whether or not he or she has performed that task. And if that task has been performed, they get credited with a cryptocurrency unit. And I think that's the kind of end game where X is heading. That we are almost there now. We're sitting at this system. Okay, it doesn't pay us yet a cryptocurrency, and we don't have an implant. But who's the guy that's interested in implants?
Yeah,
It's just
that's
another
right.
coincidence that
Elon
he's
Musk,
implant keen. Yeah.
very
And
implant
I'm
keen.
sure, to me, I've looked at it from various angles. I'm really sure that's the end game. It kind of hit me like a ton of bricks one night at sort of 2 in the morning that, oh my, this is where this is heading.
What are your thoughts on Starlink? Our commenters are asking.
Yeah, I need to understand more, because there is an Internet of Bodies, which is another WEF. It's a white paper document. I've been reading it again recently, but of course it's all linked. Once you it's 24/7, messages in and out of your body. The transhuman agenda is you fuse with technology, and
Exactly.
of course Starlink will be again another backbone. So I'm not so sure about Starlink exactly. I mean, of course you need it for the data, but the backbones will be X, which is your sitting at home backbone, and it'll be Palantir for your going outside backbone, because that thing has all the ability to scan everything, process it through AI, and in the worst case scenario, take people out with drones.
This
you
is
know, so
terrifying.
but
This is actually terrifying. I mean, he does I mean, Musk has not hidden the fact that, and they've made this comment as well, is that he wants it to be the everything app, doesn't he? Everything from banking and shopping to social communicating.
well, that is that patent. That is that all you do is sit at that machine with your. I mean, they've added wearables as an option, I think, not to scare the horses, but really they want implants, and the implants are in the patent as well. They want you to sit there with your implants and do your stuff and get your money and buy whatever you need online and have it delivered, and that's you. You're done. You're sitting on your own in your box doing that.
What can we do? I mean, I don't want to be part and parcel of this, but I also see the value of using X with or without reach. What can we ultimately do to protect ourselves?
Well, I think you just be aware, isn't it? So you don't fall for the brainwashing, and I'm better at using it now. I try not to jump on conversations because the other thing to remember is they don't actually really care how we vote. So that's another thing. It's a penny drop. They don't care that we want immigration reduced for about 30 years now, at least 20 years. They still push it. So they're going to care even less about what you write in a tweet. So don't waste your time jumping on Sakir Starmer, you're such a blankety
Right.
blank. They
Yeah.
literally don't care. So you're just burning up your energy and finding yourself in a negative emotional state. It's total waste of time, and you have to try and stop yourself jumping on a tweet chain because, and I'm not good at this. I mean, I'm an offender, but I know that it's completely pointless, and they're trolling us. I think most of the time, I think they want those negative reactions. And a lot, and the other thing you got to remember on Twitter, which is important, is that you're always seeing videos cut in half. So like the Manchester airport incident, you first got the half where the policeman was stamping on the guy's head. So everybody went crazy from the Muslim community and a lot of people who are against, obviously, I mean, everyone's against that kind of it's not law enforcement at that point. But of course, they'd cut out the step before that, which they then released 2 weeks later, which shows the lady policeman having a nose broken. So then everyone goes completely crazy on the other side, and that's also what X is all about. It's all divide and conquer. It's all keeping us at each other's throats. So don't go for that. If you're using it for looking at for data or interacting with people, just ignore the fact or be aware of the fact that wedge issue, putting people at extreme positions is all deliberate.
I was just trying to put up Mel's comment, which I think is a good one. We need to get out more and into reality, away from these parasites. That is the thing.
Yeah.
Is that I think, like I say, I mean, I definitely see the advantages of all social media, but obviously it can be used against us by the same token. My biggest concern, though, is this administration is, as you really accurately portray in your article, about more forever wars, really.
Yeah, I mean, deep state Washington, and I've done a video about this. It is a deep state Washington. It's a merger of arms manufacturers and oligarchs, and they stand behind every think tank. And those think tanks don't even feature as an official number in the political lobbying numbers. They kind of even not even included. But that's another whole group of activity. I mean, hundreds of millions. I can actually tell you, I can't remember now, but the top 10 think tanks are also hundreds of millions, and those hundreds of millions are provided by arms manufacturers and oligarchs. And you've got, and they're called things like the Atlantic Council, SEPA is another one, Hudson Institute. They're also lobbying for this war. It's a massive racket, essentially. And it's very difficult to break out of that for ordinary people because we're not in the room even at that point. So
No,
it's a
and we're
problem.
all being directed to be emotional about this and emotional about that, and that's also obviously how it's being used against us. So thank you. Lots of, I mean, the thing is I think it's absolutely vital. We need to know what's going on behind the curtain, and we hardly ever know what's going on. And that's exactly what you do, and it's done in such a stunning way. Thank you so much, Alex, for your work, because at least it opens up to questions. We need to at least question, if nothing else. There'll be some people who are like, X is so much better than it was 3 years ago. And in some respects it was, but is it really any different than what it was 3 years ago? Because all it's doing is it's picking the subjects you can talk about now that you couldn't talk about 3 years ago. Right. So it's like, I think there's a real problem with Musk being involved with government and running X. I mean, do you think he's going to resign in any way from actually running the day-to-day operations of X?
No, I mean, I go with this George Carlin, I think it was, isn't it? It's a big club and you ain't in it. It
That's
does
right.
look to me all the time like a club. I think the roles and the money and everything else is much more secondary to some kind of club or association or clique or something they're in. I think they're connected as a clique of some sort. And there's never going to be any governance questions like, well, should you be doing this if you're doing that at the same time? I mean, clearly you shouldn't be meddling with government finance. If your business SpaceX has taken out $20 billion from the government, you're conflicted, shouldn't
Right.
be anywhere near it. But
Right.
they don't think like that. It's all what, as I said, what they're doing is the opposite of that. They're trying to merge it all together and rip out bits of the government and transfer it to themselves.
Very
So I don't
interesting.
think these guys are they're not going to worry about corporate governance and stuff like
No,
that.
I agree with you. Thank you so much for joining us, and actually for staying longer than we intended. But it's so interesting what you've examined, that I think it was worth it. So yeah.
Yeah, just one thing. I'm doing a phone in on Zoom tomorrow at 6 o'clock UK time, so people can see through Twitter or anywhere that I've put out a couple of flyers about it. So they can go into that as a one-off as well. You can buy a ticket or go through Substack as a paid subscriber.
We will run details of that in the description at the end of the stream, Alex. I'm sure many of our viewers will be very interested in taking part in that and seeing that. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody. This is Alex Creel from the Thinking Coalition, although he is known as Thinking Slow on X. Take good care of yourself. Thanks for being with us.
Yeah.
What a pleasure. What an absolute pleasure.
Thanks.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.